Hi, my name is Ben, and today I am talking the new John Crowley film, We Live in Time, which is a romance film starring Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. Before we get into this conversation, I just wanted to warn people because I don't think the trailers have necessarily been highlighting it as much as they should. This is a film about cancer. We just need to get that straight out because I don't think it's fair for an audience member to go into a movie not fully knowing that this is a story centered around cancer. I hope that's not a spoiler for anyone, but let's get into this review. So We Live in Time follows a couple essentially with this recent diagnosis, and we're following their relationship in a non-linear structure. We follow them really in a few phases of life, and I wrote them down here. We follow them meeting. We follow the birth of their child. We follow the now, and then we follow the then. And this non-linear structure of the film is certainly an aspect of this movie that I want to talk about, but let's first focus on the positives, which is certainly the performances from Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. For those who know me, Andrew Garfield has been one of my favorite performers for the past decade or so. I think he is so naturally electric on screen. He is wonderful in this movie. He is so naturally charming. You believe this character despite there being little development for these two people in this film. It is a role solely dedicated to charisma, and Garfield has it in spades. You truly felt empathy for this character. You could feel the frustration he is feeling, and it's really well paired with the Florence Pugh performance. One thing that I do want to note about the Pugh performance is Garfield is 41, Florence Pugh is 28. She does feel a bit too young for this role in certain sequences, especially as the movie cuts to the now. I didn't fully believe her in this role just due to the age and the fact that she apparently has this 7-year-old daughter, but you're supposed to believe she's a little bit older. She has this whole career that she's been doing for a number of years. I didn't buy that element. Besides that, the Pugh performance is just exceptionally strong. It's actually kind of what holds this movie together. And it's these two and their relationship that overcomes a screenplay that I would say isn't always up to par. I want to talk about some elements of this screenplay that I really liked. And with Crowley, I think what he does so well is the authenticity of a relationship as it develops naturally. I think that is something very special within We Live in Time. And I think it's actually one of the film's strongest suits is that this relationship feels so real, and thus the emotions that these characters feel tangible, which really helps when you're telling a story like this. Along with that, I think what John Crowley does very well as a director, and what we've seen in some of his previous work, such as Brooklyn, is he is able to capture sentimentality without ever feeling overly sappy. When this movie chooses to show emotion is very key, because there are scenes that when you hear a film that involves a sickness, you kind of naturally think there might be a few scenes in this movie that play to this idea of the emotions that come with a diagnosis like this. This movie actually smartly averts that. It far more chooses to be restrained and careful in those moments, and in turn rather focuses on the living and not the tragedy of a diagnosis like this. I think that's a really beneficial aspect of this movie, and it makes this story elevated as we are essentially getting to see the struggles and pain that come with a diagnosis like it, but it's not the fundamental driving point of the movie. It is a part of life, but the movie is able to still embrace life. I really liked that in it. This restraint and carefulness, though, may rub some people the wrong way, or in other cases, as I noticed with myself, it's a movie that is designed to lack explosions of emotion, but the consequence of that is it often feels stuck in neutral. I noticed myself feeling as if the movie was kind of spinning its wheels. It didn't always connect with me, and there are periods of time in this film where I noticed my interest waving as the film continued on. That is no discredit to the performances of this movie, who I think are keeping the film centered and interesting, but it is an issue with the screenplay. And the issue, I think, that going back to the screenplay with Crowley's screenplay, the story isn't original. The originality of this film comes from the way that they choose to tell this story. It highlights the cruelty of cancer without ever allowing it to take center stage. And again, I think that is the smart approach to a movie like this, and I think it gives it a unique tone and feeling to it, and it allows the relationship to feel more authentic and lived in. Where I then found myself struggling, though, is it really puts a lot of the heavy lifting on its actors. And besides that, the film tries to use this nonlinear storytelling to, I think, essentially mask a screenplay that doesn't feel particularly developed. One of the issues that I noticed and felt while watching this movie is I would describe it slight in scope. It is an intimate movie, and I would say it's a modest movie. I also found it a movie a little bit hard to relate to. Florence Pugh's character is a chef, and while I don't think she's necessarily the level of a Gordon Ramsay, she certainly seems well acclaimed and very successful, and you can clearly see the stress of her job. A large aspect of the movie dives into essentially her drive and her ambition and how that relates to her experience with a diagnosis and how she's feeling and how she wants to leave a legacy in case she doesn't make it through. There is a relatability in the ambition and the drive. It is the inner workings of a kitchen and the drama that comes within it. I just didn't think played particularly well in this movie. And I think this film would have worked a little bit better if it kind of showed them more as a ordinary couple. Maybe that's being a little too harsh. I just kind of kept noticing the chef storyline in this film was falling a little flat for me. What doesn't fall flat is the film's celebration of life. In its nonlinear storytelling, what we are supposed to take away and what we are supposed to see is that this film never wants us to wallow. Rather, it focuses entirely on love. It focuses on a love between these two people and their child. Like, that is the core tendency of this movie. And it captures love as a moment, but it also captures it as all-encompassing. All at once, I would describe the love of this movie. And it's supposed to show in this nonlinear structure that there are moments of pain, there's moments of just cruelty, of something that you cannot even imagine. And yet in there is still love, and that is the guiding principle that these characters feel in their life. And what's so brilliant about that is then there's moments where we get to see that celebration. And what we are left with is something beautiful. And I think specifically with the Florence Pugh character, there is a moment early on in the film where she talks about ice skating with her dad. And it's a moment for her of very raw vulnerability, expressing the pain of losing her dad at a young age and how that affects her wanting to follow something that she loves because it reminds her of her father. This moment is able to play on that idea a few times throughout the film and wrap back around to those ideas and show celebration in a way that I thought was quite touching and beautiful. You can get where this film goes, and it's very predictable to guess where the movie is going to eventually end, but in it, it is still able to capture something that I found real and authentic, and I thought the third act of this movie was done in a very poignant fashion. It does have the issue that I found it a bit clunky to start this movie, and the nonlinear storytelling takes a moment to get used to, and it doesn't always necessarily feel needed. However, I respected the choice, and I understood the creative craft in choosing to tell it a nonlinear storytelling. I think ungenerously, some people would say that this was to cover up a screenplay that was a bit lacking, which I can't say that is a wrong opinion. I, regardless, really responded to We Live in Time in moments. It didn't fully connect to me. I wasn't devastated, or I didn't have that emotional reaction that I felt that I was going to have going into a movie like this. I ended up respecting the craft more than I ended up enjoying the film or really appreciating the film. but I can ultimately recommend this film. I don't think you need to rush out to go see it in theaters, but I think A24, I think John Crowley, and I think Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh especially made a film worth checking out at your own convenience. And it is certainly one that I think is going to be more resonant to people who've experienced similar feelings and moments in their life. I think there is going to be some true power in this storytelling. For others, it may leave them feeling a little bit like me, where I just felt a little underwhelmed at moments in this film, but ultimately still enough to recommend We Live in Time. I'm giving it 3 out of 5 stars.